what I wanted Whitney to talk about was traditional education versus Common Core education, because I think it's important that we be able to compare the two, side by side. So I called my faithful friend, Ginny White, and I said, can you whip something up real fast? And she said, no problem. So she did, on her way to Tulsa this morning at probably about 6 o'clock in the morning. So this could be interesting. Ginny White is a friend of Tulsa 912 Project. She's one of my best friends. The work that she does is phenomenal. Her passion is amazing. And I'll just throw something in. She does have a master's degree in biology. Isn't that right? Or you said science? She homeschools her children using the classical conversation. She's an amazing woman, a wonderful friend, and a patriot that we can all look up to. And so if you would join me in welcoming Ginny White, she's going to talk to us about traditional education versus Common Core education.
Embarrassed. I usually hear lots of negative things from my kids, so it's weird to hear positive things, so I'm not sure how to take that. And thank goodness for you. Okay. All right, I have a book here that I want to share with you this morning, or this afternoon. It's called The Thomas Jefferson Education. And there was, before I even start on this program, which like she said will be interesting, I've never done this, I just wrote it on the way. But I wanted to share with you a couple of quotations out of this book that I think will give you an idea. That light is right in my eye. Will give you an idea about how I feel about education. Think of a human pair teaching their child how to walk. There is on the child's side strong desire and latent powers. He has legs and means to use them. He walks and smiles. He totters and looks alarmed. He falls and cries. The parents smile throughout, showering advice, warnings, encouragement, and praise. The whole story, not only of teaching, but of man and of civilization, is wrapped up in this first academic performance. All the knowledge, skill, art, and science that we use and revere, up to Einstein's formula about the stars, is a mere repetition, an extension of the initial feat of learning to walk. But this extension does not take place by itself. Most of it has to be taught slowly and painfully. There was a time when Einstein was not even quite sure what 8 times 9 came to. He had to learn to be taught. I think that's something that we don't think about. We think about teaching kids, but we don't think about, are they ready to learn what we have to teach them? And I think that's one problem with the kind of conveyor belt philosophy we've started in public education, and that's kind of come to this particular movement. Now I'm going to follow that with one last quote, because I really like this one too. This is by Confucius. He says, by 3 methods we learn wisdom. First, by reflection, which is the noblest. Second, by imitation, which is the easiest. And third, by experience, which is the bitterest. Please note that he did not say knowledge. He said what? Wisdom. Are wisdom and knowledge the same thing? No, go to any university today, it's a very sad thing. There's a lot of knowledge and very little wisdom. So what are we trying to impart to our children? Are we trying to impart knowledge or wisdom? Really, wisdom is the ultimate goal. And I think it's very, very important. And I would like you, if you're interested in a classical form of education, look up this book. You can get it anywhere. It's a cheap book. Thomas Jefferson Education. All right, let's start with the slides and we'll see how far we get with this. Okay, I wanted to use this particular slide because I wanted you to see, you'll know that we've been testing on computers, right? And that's been our big thing lately. That was why we had all the problems testing on computers. Well, that's kind of my definition right there. You have COAT, C-O-A-T, you have a computer, okay? Let's go to the next slide. All right, we actually have 2 different forms of education, basically, okay? One is the traditional, it's also called the academic, and one is called the transformational or progressive. And please believe me, this is not a political statement. I'm not making a political statement. That's just what they call it. Next. All right, there's a lot of wording on here. I was doing a lot of cutting and pasting, because Ron didn't tell you this, but I was driving while I was doing this. Julia says, because I text and draw. So Julia would think that, yeah, she probably could, if I'd let her. All right, academic or traditional education. I'm just going to hit a couple of points here. If you'll look down here, it says, based on the recitation and memorization of facts from textbooks, about which become the basis for higher order learning and critical thinking skills. Well, Dr. Parisi talked to us about higher order critical thinking, correct? We're not going to split hairs over textbooks, because obviously you can get information any place today, and that's a great thing. But the point is, we use recitation and memorization. That's our basis for traditional education. All right, outcomes are neither expected nor required. Does anybody remember outcomes-based education? We actually killed that here in Oklahoma in the 90s. Well, Common Core state standards have a whole lot in common with outcome-based education, and we'll touch on that. All right. It is not required that every student leave prepared for college, or that every student receive an education that prepares them for a job. Apprenticeships were common. Has anybody ever watched Dirty Jobs? You know that one? Oh, God, I love my throw. Because I think that what really offends me, and I will say it's offensive. I will tell you it's offensive. The reason why Common Core offends me so much is because you're telling me the only thing this is college and career ready. So I have to go through a whole battery of tests, and I have to go through 12 years of schooling to be able to pump out a septic system? But don't you need your septic system pumped out? I have. I was sure happy the guy showed up. So why is it that we seem to believe that the only job you can have requires a college education? Do you understand and know that compulsory education was not even the plan of the founders when they began thinking about public education in the first place? We invented compulsory education. The founders were actually educated sometimes only up until 8th grade. What did they do after that? Did they just give up? Was that the end of it? Oh gosh, we're too stupid to go on. Heck no, they went into apprenticeships. An 8th grade education back then was probably like a sophomore, junior year in college back then anyway, so it's hard to draw those kinds of parallels today. However, I just am going to point out here that that system of education, even 50 years ago, was not the same that we have today. We did not believe in compulsory schooling, and we did not believe that everybody had to go to college. All right, simple cognitive tests compared the abilities of students with each other, and mastery was not required for passing. Did I mention anything about testing in the quotes that I wrote to you? Does wisdom require a test? Can you give somebody a test for wisdom? Well, I have tried. What was the wisdom of leaving that garbage out in the yard when you knew the raccoon would get to it? That's never helped me. We never get to the answer to that question. All right, next. Oh, teacher-centered and directed. I think that's a very, very, very important thing about traditional education. It was teacher-centered and directed. Okay, so what's transformational education? Well, it believes that the purpose of education is to make radical changes in the nature of our people, government, basic institutions, and all of society and our entire world. It defines the purpose of education in terms of changing attitudes, values, and worldviews. Here's what I want you to really take away. Student-centered instruction with hands-on activities, student-led discovery group activities, project-based things, interdisciplinary works. These were all things that were really being implemented in the 70s when I was going to school, and we had those big classrooms where you could break down the barriers and everybody got to sit together, and oh, wasn't that exciting? Well, I didn't really need that. I just needed a teacher, especially me, who would sit there with a ruler over my knuckles and go, listen, okay? It was very, very important. The one thing about John Dewey, I was going to say the one thing about John Dewey that I hate, but there are multiple myriads of those, so we won't go into all of them today. But one of the things I particularly despise is that he truly believed that children would teach each other, that children were just somehow contained all of the knowledge of the known universe, and if you just put them together in a room, for Pete's sake, they were going to teach each other how to build rocket ships to the stars. Well, I've tried that with my children. Something gets broken or burned up. And if your children are different, then God is good to you. That's not what happens with mine. I say, figure this out. Something gets broken or burned up. All right. There is a significant bit of attention paid to social development. I think that's something that's very concerning. If we were watching old Beaver Cleaver reruns, we really like those. And you notice how psychology was really taking over at that point in time, and how psychology had become very important in the way we teach our schools and raise our kids. And really, that's not psychology wasn't mentioned in there either, right? We don't have to understand the psychology of our children to impart wisdom. All right, students, like I said, they kind of direct their own education. All right, next slide. All right, now here's what I want you to get to, and I'm going to have to go quickly because Rhonda put me in a box. You can't put me in a box. I just have to speak however long I speak, but Rhonda put me in a box. So, student learning centers around social life or related problems, issues, and challenges based on current events and future trends, not historical knowledge or facts. Do you remember Linda Murphy standing up here and talking about how we had global warming? And even Donna Anderson mentioned how we have global warming in Common Core today. Well, if that's not similar to what I just described, I'm not really sure what is. So I think when you see your kids come home or your grandkids come home, and this is what we're talking about, social things, socially related things, I think you need to stop and question what's going on. Next slide. All right, outcomes are picked first, then the curricula, then the instruction, and then the teaching methodologies are aligned to move the child to the desired outcome. What is the outcome for Common Core? There are two. Career ready, college ready. Isn't that what they say all the time? They're college and career ready. They're college and career ready. Well, there's your outcome right there. You're either going to go to a workforce training where you're going to go into the college. So that's our outcome. We've already picked that. I think it's important to remember when you think of the outcome where you want a student to be, that's where you're actually turning what they're thinking around to your level of thinking. So it really affects worldview, and that's very important. Okay, next one. All right, all students of all groups will reach the same minimum standards. Schools may not give up on unsuccessful students. Okay, well, that sounds kind of awful. You're like, well, I'm not going to just kick. I was a teacher for 10 years. I wasn't going to just kick a kid out of the classroom because they couldn't get it. That's not what they're trying to say. What they're trying to say is all children are individuals. All children. I have a child who is 8 who sees, no, he's not dyslexic. He can read better than anybody in the house, but he sees all of his numbers backwards. It's called dyscalculus. So if you say 123, and you write it down, he'll say 321 every single time. That's just the way his brain works. Well, if he's in a classroom and he's expected to reach all the same minimum standards with everybody else, how do I fight that? I'm not going to put him in special education. So how do I do that? We have to begin observing and treating our children as individuals, because they're as individual as your home as they are at school, I guarantee you. Next. All right, performance standards and grading rubrics are not based on traditional knowledge and skills, but higher order thinking skills and problem solving, and sometimes even attitudes. Does that sound anything like our superintendent told you this morning? We're basing this all on critical thinking. Next time, I'd like you to say, well, isn't that odd? That kind of sounds a little bit like outcomes-based education, and see what happens. Basically, what you're talking about with outcome-based education is you can't process information logically, and you can't think about it critically if you don't have a basis. And where does that basis come from? We learned that early on. It comes from rote memorization, right? Remembering things and studying things. So we're not going to teach kids with a test, right? We have to actually force them to learn things. All right, next. All right, this is something that Dr. Breesy did touch on, and I do think it's important to tell you this, because those of you who are parents and grandparents need to understand this. Whole word language, the method of reading where you say, memorize that this is snake. Okay, there's an S and an A and an A and a K and an E, and you just memorize it. When you put it together, it looks like this. Okay, that's basically whole word language, right? We had a lot of, and Dr. Reese was correct, we have a lot of teachers' colleges who still do come out, spit out teachers who do whole word reading. Well, that's never been proven to work. I mean, there have been studies and studies and studies and studies, and that's never been proven to work. It has been. Phonics is a proven method, along with a little bit of the whole word, because you need to be able to recognize what words look like, but basically how to sound them out. That C can sound k or s, right? That's what we're learning. In Oklahoma, we actually passed a law, and I think it's been, did I put it up there, 2011, that mandates that all schools teach phonics. So if your kid is coming home, this happened to me in elementary school, by the way, the little 8-year-old comes home and he brings me a book. And I said, well, this is an interesting book. And I'm looking through it, and of course it has pictures of things with words underneath. I went, stop that, right now. So I went and talked to a teacher who was I loved her, she was just precious. And I went to her and I said, okay, this isn't going to work. This is, we can't do this here in Oklahoma. We need to not do whole word reading. So, and my ear must be really huge. I must have the biggest ears. I must be like Howdy Doody. Now I want to go, okay. So if your kid comes home with a book that has pictures in it, and you're supposed to memorize that, I want you to immediately take that back to your child's classroom and say, here in Oklahoma we have a law that prevents this kind of reading. We read phonetically. Okay, next. All right, traditional math versus progressive math. I really want you to kind of dig in here. I have enough time to explain this to you. Please take notes if you must. If you would like to have this in paper, it's right out here on our table, and I really ask you, if you're interested in this, to pick these up and take them home. So what is traditional math? Well, it's emphasis on memorization of basic facts, like the multiplication tables and addition and subtraction. One correct answer. There's not 2 or 3. You don't get there in different ways. It's one answer is correct kind of a thing. Mathematics after elementary grades is tracked with different students covering different levels of material. So really, after elementary school, you had better have the kids on an independent track for mathematics if it's really going to work traditionally. All right? That means they may be ready for algebra as early as 7th grade. Who knows? It's just up to your kid. Mathematics is taught as its own discipline. This is so important. Without emphasis on social, political, or global issues. There may be some emphasis on practical applications in science and technology, but let's say, how many carbon units does it take to get to the number of units that Al Gore expends every time he turns on his air conditioning in his Tennessee house? Okay, that's not appropriate for math, so just make sure that that's not what's coming home. Next. Now contrast that with transformational math. This curriculum actually de-emphasizes procedural knowledge. So you're not going to find out how does 4 plus 2 actually add together to come up with 6. Okay, that's not what you're working on so well in transformational math. The lessons may be more exploratory. Oh, well, Sue went to the store and she got a couple of loaves of bread, and by the time she got home, blah, 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 that kind of thing. All right? Emphasis may be on practical applications and greater issues such as the environment, gender and racial diversity, social justice. If you guys haven't heard of this, we actually had a book at my kids' school that was called Green Math. And it was actually, about the world, about, biologic stuff, but it just so happened that a lot of it was due to, humanism, and I had kind of a problem with that. Mathematics lessons may include writing, drawing aids, and instructions with manipulatives rather than filling out worksheets. I am sorry, but call me the mean old teacher, because I'm going to sit there and make my kids do math worksheets. Why? Well, because they're learning the math as they're going. They have to start somewhere, and if they can't figure out how to get 2 plus 4 is 6, we're in big trouble. So they're going to sit there and work a worksheet until they get it done. They're not going to add beans. I'm not going to go in there and do that. We're just going to sit there and add it up, and then we're going to memorize them. Grading may be based on demonstration of conceptual understanding rather than whether or not the final answer is correct. We've had a lot of people complain about seeing mathematical lessons like this in their schools because unfortunately everyday math is something that fits very well with the Common Core curriculum, and everyday math is such an awful curriculum for math that it's actually I think it was the World Teachers of Mathematics or something like that made the statement that it could be actually dangerous to kids learning math. That's how bad it is. And unfortunately, that's kind of what everyday math literally does, is they give you more of a conceptual, well, if you did that and if you did that, what would happen? Well, it's not going to matter, because if I add 4 to 2, I'm going to get 6. So we're not worried about discussing it, we're worried about memorizing 4 plus 2 is 6. In some countries, there may be expectations of high achievement in mastering algebra for all students rather than tracking some students into business math and others into mathematics for science and math. That's something that's kind of important, too, that we don't do. We just heard a lot about, there was somebody very knowledgeable on math in here earlier, and he was talking about calculus. Well, not every kid's going to do calculus. I mean, I have a master's in biology. I had something like 211 college hours, if you can believe that. But I did. But the point of the matter was that I lost my train of thought on that. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Oh, I love you guys. I never had to have calculus because biology majors are traditionally horrible at math. So I was able to get off with some basic statistics and like algebra 2, and I was like, yeah. But I still was a good biologist. So that didn't mess up what I needed to do. So forcing kids into math tracks isn't always what we need to be doing too. We need to find out what works for them and what's going to be best for their lives and what they can do on their skill level. All right, next. We talked about academic reading and phonics. Really, phonics has been proven over and over again to be the best method. Next. Same thing with whole language or word picture reading. It just doesn't help if you, and I've thought about it like this quite a bit. If you see a picture of snake, that's great, but if you don't know S and N together say sn, and then the E, silent E is in ninja, it makes the A say its name, then how are you going to recognize it if you see rope or you see tape? Okay, so it's very important. Next. Are you coming to get me off already? Give me 2 minutes. Okay. I'm going to go through these last two slides and then that'll be done because she'll get a hook on me. All right, educational theory of Karl Marx. Now I want you to just follow through with me. This was his actual education theory. A change of social circumstances was required to establish a proper system of education. On the other hand, a proper system of education was required to bring about a change of social circumstances. Combines education with industrial production. What have we just talked about? Workforce, workforce, workforce. Constructivist in nature, where meaning is constructed by the subject as material provided by the external world rather than discovered. Global warming, for example. Emphasizes the social history and collaborative character of human activity. Doesn't have to do with anything. Okay, that's for philosophy later on. They, the communists, seek to rescue education from the influence of the ruling class, because we don't want people going to college next, they'd be too smart. Okay, so let's contrast that with Thomas Jefferson. Knowledge is obtained by studying classic literature, languages, and the history of past societies and empires through life. Literacy is most important for citizenship and successful self-government. If you can't read the Constitution, you don't know how to explain it to somebody else, let alone how it works for you. True knowledge is obtained and true wisdom by seeing, listening, and reading. All men are created equal, and all children should be educated to instill the traits of self-discipline. How often do we do that? Self-governance. How often do we do that? And self-efficacy. And that's not put you in a group and see what you come up with. Self-efficacy is how you learn to respond to your environment yourself. Fact-based knowledge from books rather than actual experiences were more important in obtaining knowledge because that led to wisdom, just like we read in the Confucius quote. Okay, I am done. She's going to pull me off with a hook. Thank you guys for listening. If you want more information on that, it's on our table.
If you guys want to go ahead and start moving on.